On the evening of December 17th, 2011, in a suite at the Four Seasons Hotel in Beirut, a woman known as Alara Moreau was conducting a final, ritualistic check of her attire. The dress, a deep sapphire silk gown, by a designer whose name carried significant weight in the circle she was about to enter, had been tailored not for aesthetics alone, but for function. Its seams were reinforced with a micro-thin metallic thread to prevent static buildup, and the cut allowed for an unrestricted range of motion that belied its elegant form. Her accessories were similarly dual-purposed. The earrings were simple diamond studs, yet the left one contained a sub-vocal transducer that, when touched to the mastoid bone behind her ear, would allow her to receive communications without any visible earpiece. The most critical component, however, was the clutch she held in her gloved hands. It was a bespoke creation from a Parisian artisan, its exterior a mosaic of shimmering black mother-of-pearl. Its true nature was concealed within its ornate clasp, a masterpiece of microengineering that housed a narrow-beam inductive data transfer unit. Moreau was not an art curator preparing for a high-society wedding. She was a clandestine operative of the French General Directorate for External Security. And the wedding was not a social engagement, but the meticulously prepared kill box for an intelligence operation codenamed Winter Bride. Her target was not a person to be neutralized, but a device to be digitally violated. And the success of the entire multinational effort to halt the proliferation of a new generation of man-portable air defense systems rested upon the flawless execution of a plan that would culminate in a carefully choreographed moment of physical contact lasting no more than 5 seconds. The strategic problem that necessitated Operation Winter Bride had emerged from the chaotic collapse of the Gaddafi regime in Libya months earlier. Amid the looting of state armories, a specific weapon system had vanished that sent a wave of cold dread through the intelligence communities of every Western nation. The system in question was a late-generation Russian manpads, the 9K-33 Verba, which had been supplied to Libya in small numbers under a clandestine agreement. Unlike its predecessors, the Verba featured a revolutionary tri-band optical seeker immune to most conventional countermeasures, making it a catastrophic threat to civilian aviation. Initial intelligence suggested that at least 50 of these systems, along with their gripstocks and batteries, had been acquired by a sophisticated trafficking network. The urgency was absolute. The appearance of even one of these weapons in the hands of a non-state actor could shut down international air travel and hold global economies hostage. Yet all conventional methods of tracking the weapons had failed. Satellite imagery and signals intelligence were useless against a network that moved its product in small, disassembled components through established smuggling routes, buried in shipments of produce or welded into the chassis of commercial vehicles. Attempts to infiltrate the network at the lower levels had resulted in the deaths of 2 assets and yielded nothing of value, as the network was highly compartmentalized. The foot soldiers who moved the hardware knew nothing of the architects who arranged its sale, communicating only through encrypted, single-use burner phones and dead drops. After months of frustrating dead ends, a consensus formed among the Allied intelligence services spearheading the effort. The only way to decapitate the network was to identify and compromise its central financial clearinghouse, the individual who managed the transactions, laundered the funds, and connected the Libyan suppliers with the global buyers. The target profile, assembled painstakingly over 6 months from fragmented SIGINT intercepts, debriefings of captured smugglers, and financial forensics, pointed to one man, Zain al-Jamil. On the surface, al-Jamil was the epitome of the modern, Western-educated Lebanese elite. He was the chief operating officer of his family's vast shipping and logistics conglomerate, a third-generation fortune built on legitimate trade that provided him with an unassailable cover. He was a fixture in the social scenes of Beirut, London, and Monaco, known for his impeccable taste, his quiet philanthropy in the arts, and a personal charm that was both disarming and commanding. He was not an ideologue or a fanatic. He was a pure creature of commerce, a predator who had identified an exceptionally profitable market in advanced weaponry and applied his considerable logistical and financial acumen to its exploitation. Al-Jamil was insulated by layers of protocol and paranoia. He never directly discussed his illicit business on any electronic device, meeting with key lieutenants only in person in locations swept for surveillance. His true operational tool was a bespoke, air-gapped personal ledger, a device roughly the size of a slim smartphone but with no networking capabilities whatsoever. It was protected by multi-layered encryption and, according to a human source who had once glimpsed it, required a complex biometric sequence to access. On this device, he maintained the complete architecture of his network: supplier contacts, buyer identities, transaction histories, and payment channels. Zain al-Jamil was the network's brain, and his ledger was its memory. The intelligence assessment was stark. Without the data on that device, the network would remain a ghost, its lethal products continuing to disseminate into the global black market. The challenge was that he was known to carry the device on his person at all times, in a specially tailored pocket on the inside of his suit jackets. The conventional options for compromising al-Jamil were deemed impossible. He was not susceptible to blackmail, as his public life was meticulously curated. He was too wealthy and disciplined to be entrapped by greed or vice. A black bag operation to steal the device from his home or office was ruled out. His personal security was formidable, incorporating former Lebanese special forces and state-of-the-art electronic countermeasures. Abduction was considered and dismissed as too loud, too likely to create a diplomatic incident, and with no guarantee that he would divulge the device's access codes even under extreme duress. The solution, therefore, had to be audacious and unconventional. It was conceived in a soundproofed conference room at the DGSE headquarters in Paris. The plan was not to steal the device, but to conduct a close-access data exfiltration. They would need an operative to get physically close enough to al-Jamil to use a specialized piece of technology to wirelessly copy the ledger's encrypted contents. The critical obstacle was engineering that proximity. A detailed psychological workup of al-Jamil, compiled from surveillance reports and source interviews, identified a single, exploitable pattern in his behavior: a pronounced affinity for intelligent, cultured European women who could engage him on his passions for postmodern art and classical music. It was a specific type, not merely a matter of physical attraction, but of intellectual connection. This vulnerability provided the key. The operational proposal was to build an operative with a perfectly tailored legend, insert her into his social orbit, and use a high-profile event that his paranoia would not allow him to miss as the venue for the attack. His younger sister's wedding, a major event on the Beirut social calendar, was identified as the ideal theater. The operation was codenamed Winter Bride, a high-risk, high-reward gambit that would require an unprecedented level of preparation and an operative of exceptional caliber. The technological centerpiece of the operation was the data exfiltration tool, disguised as the clutch. The internal components were a marvel of miniaturization, developed by the DGSE's Technical Services Division. The core of the device was an inductive data transfer unit, a technology adapted from secure military communication systems. It worked by generating a tightly focused magnetic field capable of inducing a current in the target device's internal circuitry, forcing a data dump through a known hardware vulnerability that had been discovered by signals intelligence analysts studying the device's faint electromagnetic emissions. This method was chosen because it required no physical connection and left no software trace on the target device. The transfer was incredibly short range, with an optimal distance of less than 2 centimeters and a maximum effective range of 5. The exfiltration would be lightning fast, with the entire encrypted data package of approximately 4 gigabytes transferred in a burst lasting just 3.7 seconds. To aid the operative, the clutch was also fitted with a miniature, software-defined radio receiver, calibrated to detect the specific, unique electromagnetic frequency emitted by the ledger's processor. This would allow the operative to confirm the presence and approximate location of the device on Al-Jamil's person without needing a visual confirmation. The data, once captured, would be stored on a solid-state memory chip embedded within the clutch's lining, itself protected by a layer of physical encryption that could only be unlocked back at a secure facility. The entire system was powered by a flat, flexible lithium polymer battery custom molded to the clutch's interior shell, providing more than enough power for the single burst transmission and 72 hours of standby monitoring. The final product was a work of art that was also a weapon, a perfect fusion of high fashion and high technology. The operative selected for Winter Bride was an individual known by the internal designation Echo. Her real name was a closely guarded secret, her past life meticulously erased from public records. Before her recruitment, she had been a respected art historian at the Sorbonne, specializing in the cultural heritage of the Levant. Her path into the world of intelligence was one of tragedy and purpose. Her husband, an investigative journalist, had been murdered in Syria by a splinter cell of a terrorist organization, killed by an explosively formed penetrator that had been sourced from the very black market networks the DGSE was now targeting. Her grief did not break her. It forged her into something cold, precise, and utterly dedicated. The agency saw in her not just a motive, but a rare combination of intellect, linguistic ability. She was fluent in French, English, and both formal and colloquial Arabic, and an innate talent for social camouflage. Her recruitment and training were intensive and unforgiving. She spent 18 months at a DGSE training facility, where her academic mind was reshaped into an operational one. She mastered the arts of social engineering, learning to read micro-expressions, to manipulate conversations, and to project a persona of absolute authenticity. She underwent psychological conditioning designed to compartmentalize her emotions and to insulate her from the immense stress of deep cover work. Her physical training was equally rigorous, focusing on defensive tactics, evasive driving customized to the anarchic streets of Beirut, and the specific, delicate handling of the operations technology. She became an expert in her own legend, absorbing every detail of the fictitious life of Alara Moreau until it was more real to her than her own. The creation of the cover identity, or Arc Quote 2 of Alara Moreau, was an operation in itself, a masterpiece of long-term strategic deception that began 2 years before the wedding. The goal was to build a life so detailed and verifiable that it could withstand the intense, passive scrutiny of Beirut's insular high society. A team from the DGSE's clandestine support branch began by fabricating a digital ghost. They created a professional website for Alara, showcasing a portfolio of curated exhibitions, some real with her name digitally inserted into archival material, others entirely fabricated. They ghost-wrote and published several scholarly articles on Levantine art in niche, respected academic journals, establishing her credentials. Social media profiles were created on multiple platforms, backdated with years of content depicting a plausible life. Gallery openings in Geneva, research trips to museums in London, cafe lunches in Paris. These profiles were updated sporadically but consistently, mimicking the online behavior of a real person. The next phase was physical establishment. The agency, through a front company, purchased a small, elegant apartment for her in the Ashrafiyeh district of Beirut, a neighborhood favored by European expatriates. Over the course of 18 months of, quote, Denmark, made 4 separate trips to Beirut. These were not mere visits. They were carefully scripted performances. She would stay for 2 to 3 weeks at a time, making genuine contacts in the local art scene. She met gallery owners, attended auctions, and hosted small dinner parties at her apartment. She even curated a small, entirely legitimate exhibition for a struggling local artist, a move that cemented her reputation as a genuine patron of the arts and provided a perfect, logical reason for her continued presence in the city. Every action was designed to build a bedrock of authenticity, to create a person who belonged in the world that Zayn al-Jamil inhabited. The final piece of the puzzle was securing the invitation to the wedding. A direct approach was too risky. Instead, the agency's planners targeted the periphery of the al-Jamil family. Through network analysis, they identified a distant cousin of the groom, a Swiss-Lebanese banker with a passion for collecting modern art. 9 months before the wedding, Alara Moreau was positioned to meet this man at a private art auction in Zurich. Guided by her handler, who provided real-time intelligence on the target's interests and bidding patterns via her earring transducer, Alara engaged him in a conversation about a particular painting. She demonstrated a level of knowledge and passion that he found captivating. Over the next few months, she cultivated a careful friendship with him, communicating via email and meeting for coffee when their, quote, Amos coincided in London. The relationship was strictly platonic and professional, built on a shared interest. It was she who subtly guided the conversation, making it seem like his idea when he suggested that, as she was so often in Beirut for her work, she must attend the upcoming al-Jamil wedding, promising it would be the event of the season and a wonderful networking opportunity. The invitation, when it arrived via formal courier at her Ashrafiyeh apartment a month later, was not a lucky break. It was the calculated result of a year-long psychological campaign. With the invitation secured, the final phase of the operation was set in motion. Alara arrived in Beirut 2 weeks before the wedding date, slipping back into her established life. She reactivated her social network, attending gallery functions and lunches, her behavior a perfect continuation of her previous visits. Her communication with her handler was sparse and highly secure, conducted through a custom application that embedded encrypted text messages into the metadata of high-resolution images of artwork she would quote 6 with her contacts. The instructions were invisible, the communications untraceable. On the day of the wedding, Alara's preparation was a study in controlled precision. She awoke at dawn and followed a routine designed to achieve peak physical and mental acuity. It included a 30-minute session of mindfulness meditation to regulate her heart rate and breathing, followed by a high-intensity workout in her apartment to burn off excess adrenaline. Her breakfast was light and specific, formulated to provide sustained energy without any risk of digestive distress. The hours leading up to the event were spent in a final, exhaustive review of the operational plan. She mentally walked through the layout of the hotel ballroom, which had been mapped by a DGSE technical team posing as event planners weeks prior. They had identified the locations of security cameras, the patrol routes of al-Jamil's personal bodyguards, and the most likely areas where the target would congregate. She rehearsed the script for dozens of potential social interactions, practicing her responses to questions about her work, her life in Europe, and her connection to the wedding party. She visualized the critical moment of contact, the stumble, the apology, the precise angle and pressure required for the clutch to make contact with the target device. The process was a form of self-hypnosis, embedding the mission parameters so deeply into her subconscious that her actions in the high-stress environment of the wedding would be reflexive and flawless. When she finally stepped into the sapphire gown, she was no longer just an operative playing a role. She had fully inhabited the persona of Alara Moreau, a confident and serene art curator ready for a splendid evening. Her own identity, her grief, her cold purpose were locked away in a mental compartment, inaccessible until the mission was complete. The transformation was total. The venue was the grand ballroom of the Hotel Saint-Georges, a legendary landmark of Beirut overlooking the Mediterranean. As Alara arrived, she was met with a scene of overwhelming opulence. The air was thick with the scent of thousands of white orchids and expensive perfume. The sound was a symphony of clinking champagne glasses, classical music from a string quartet, and the murmur of conversations in Arabic, French, and English. This was the hunting ground, a complex social ecosystem of old money, political power, and carefully concealed rivalries. Her first task was to blend in seamlessly. She moved through the room with a practiced grace, greeting the few people she knew with genuine warmth and allowing herself to be introduced to others. She accepted a glass of champagne but did not drink from it, a standard element of operational discipline. Her senses were on high alert, her mind processing everything. The shifting dynamics of conversations, the subtle hierarchies displayed in greetings, the ever-present but discreet movements of security personnel. Her earring transducer remained silent, her handler trusting her to navigate the initial phase of the operation independently. She knew Zayn al-Jamil would not arrive until later, making a calculated entrance as was his custom. Her objective during this period was to establish her presence as a natural and unremarkable part of the scenery. A welcome guest enjoying the celebration, thereby lowering the baseline of suspicion for everyone in the room, including the target's security detail, who were undoubtedly scanning every new arrival. Zayn al-Jamil made his entrance just as the main course was being served. A subtle shift in the room's energy marked his arrival. He moved with an understated confidence, a man completely at ease in his position of power. He was dressed in a flawless, custom-tailored suit, and Alara noted the slight, almost imperceptible bulge on the left side of his jacket, precisely where the intelligence profile had indicated he kept the ledger. He was surrounded by a coterie of associates, but his eyes were never still, constantly scanning the room with a practiced, almost predatory awareness. This was the moment her handler broke radio silence. A soft, triple click in her ear confirmed that the support team was active and monitoring. Their assets included audio surveillance from microtransmitters planted in the floral centerpieces and visual feeds from operatives posing as hotel staff. Alara did not approach him directly. That would be too aggressive, too obvious. Instead, she began a slow, calculated social orbit, moving from one group to another, gradually closing the distance. She engaged in a lengthy, animated discussion about a new art installation with the Lebanese Minister of Culture, knowing that al-Jamil, a patron of the museum the minister oversaw, would notice. The conversation was a piece of bait, designed to leverage his known interests. As she had anticipated, after several minutes, al-Jamil excused himself from his group and approached hers. The minister performed the introductions. Al-Jamil's handshake was firm, his smile was charming, but his eyes were analytical, assessing her. This was the first test. The conversation that followed was a high-stakes duel fought with pleasantries and intellectual discourse. He inquired about her work, and she spoke with passion and expertise about her latest project, a retrospective on the Lebanese modernist painter Saloua Raouda Choucair. She deliberately used specific, technical, art-historical terms, a subtle signal of her bona fides. She mentioned the friend who had invited her, cementing her legitimate place at the event. Al-Jamil was an active and intelligent participant in the conversation, testing her knowledge, probing for inconsistencies. Throughout their 10-minute interaction, Alara was acutely aware of the device in her hand. The clutch's internal SDR was active, and she could feel a faint, rhythmic pulse through the mother-of-pearl casing, a tactile confirmation that the ledger was within its detection range. Her handler fed her a single, whispered word through her earpiece. Quote 7. The device was on him. Now, all she needed was the opportunity. She knew it had to be a moment of chaos, a distraction that would overwhelm the senses of everyone nearby, including his security detail. The plan had designated the cutting of the towering, multi-tiered wedding cake as the primary window of opportunity. It was a moment of manufactured celebration that would draw every eye and create a natural surge of people moving towards a single point in the room. She gracefully excused herself from the conversation with Al-Jamil, saying she needed to congratulate the bride and moved to position herself near the cake, placing herself in the predictable path he would take to join his family for the ceremony. The moment arrived with a flourish of music and a round of applause. The bride and groom stood before the cake, knife in hand, as photographers' flashes began to strobe, creating a disorienting effect. And guests pressed forward, Ilara initiated her move. It was an act of precise, controlled violence, disguised as a clumsy accident. As Al-Jamil passed her, she pivoted on her heel, her body turning into his path. She let her ankle twist, her body lurching forward as if she had stumbled. Her left hand, holding the clutch, shot out to steady herself, pressing directly against the left breast of his jacket. The physical contact was firm but fleeting. For 3.7 seconds, the ornate clasp of her bag was held less than a centimeter from his hidden device. She felt a single, sharp vibration from the clutch, the haptic feedback signal confirming that the data transfer was complete. The entire sequence, from stumble to recovery, was over in less than 5 seconds. She looked up at him, her face a perfect mask of embarrassment and apology. He was momentarily surprised, but his ingrained social grace took over. He steadied her, smiled, and assured her that it was quite all right, accepting her flustered apologies before turning his attention back to the celebration. No one in the crush of people had noticed the interaction. His bodyguards, their attention momentarily diverted by the flashing cameras and the principal they were protecting, had seen only a minor social mishap. Ilara had executed the core of the mission flawlessly. The network's entire memory was now stored in the lining of her handbag. The most dangerous part of the operation was not the act itself, but the aftermath. An immediate departure would be suspicious, a deviation from the pattern of a normal guest. She had to maintain her cover. For the next 47 minutes, a period timed precisely by her operational plan, she remained at the wedding. She forced herself to circulate, to make small talk, to laugh at a joke. She even had another brief, terrifyingly normal conversation with Zayn al-Jamil himself, who wished her a safe flight back to Paris. To an outside observer, she was perfectly composed. Internally, her nervous system was alight with adrenaline, and it took every ounce of her conditioning to project an aura of calm. Every glance from a security guard, every unexpected question, felt like a potential precursor to exposure. Finally, after a carefully calibrated interval, she made her excuses to the groom's parents, citing an early morning flight she had to catch. She left the hotel not through the main entrance, but through a side exit leading to the gardens, as prearranged. A black sedan, indistinguishable from the hundreds of other luxury cars in Beirut, was waiting for her. She got in the back, and it pulled away smoothly into the city's traffic. This was the first step of her exfiltration. 2 blocks away, she exited the sedan and entered a small bakery that was closed for the night. Inside, she changed into a different set of clothes and exited through a rear door, getting into a nondescript utility van. This vehicle took her to a subterranean parking garage where she made her final switch to a diplomatic vehicle that transported her to a secure DGSE safe house in the hills overlooking the city. There, the clutch was handed over to a waiting technical team, and her debriefing began. Within 12 hours of the data theft, before Zayn al-Jamil had even woken up, the woman known as Ilara Moreau had ceased to exist, extracted from Lebanon on a military transport under the cover of pre-dawn darkness. The data recovered from the clutch was more valuable than the planners of Operation Winter Bride had dared to hope. Once decrypted by specialists at DGSE headquarters, a process that took nearly a week of intense computational work, Al-Jamil's ledger revealed the network's entire operational blueprint. It contained names, locations, and communication protocols for the Libyan militia commanders who were the source of the manpads. It detailed the smuggling routes through Niger and Algeria, the shipping containers and front companies used for transport, and the corrupt customs officials on the network's payroll. Most critically, it contained a comprehensive list of buyers: terrorist organizations in the Sahel, insurgent groups in Syria, and even organized crime syndicates in Europe. The intelligence was a Rosetta Stone for the global arms black market. Armed with this definitive data, a coordinated, multinational campaign was launched. Over the next 6 months, a series of quiet, targeted operations systematically dismantled Al-Jamil's empire. A French Special Forces raid on a warehouse in Mali recovered 17 of the Verba systems. A financial task force froze dozens of bank accounts, strangling the network's cash flow. Key lieutenants were arrested in a dozen different countries on unrelated charges, their connection to the arms trafficking network never made public. The impact was devastating and decisive. The flow of advanced weaponry from Libyan stockpiles was effectively choked off. As for Zayn al-Jamil, he was never publicly implicated. A public arrest would have compromised the source of the intelligence. Instead, 3 months after the wedding, select pieces of information from his own ledger, carefully altered to implicate him in cheating a notoriously violent Chechen syndicate, were leaked through a trusted intermediary. His death was reported as a tragic accident. His yacht had exploded and sunk during a solo trip off the coast of Cyprus. His body was never recovered. For the operative known as Echo, the successful conclusion of the mission brought no sense of triumph or closure. The Alara Moreau legend was permanently burned, the identity and the life she had inhabited for 2 years gone forever. Back in the sterile anonymity of the agency, she underwent an extensive psychological debriefing. The process was designed to help her decompress from the role and reintegrate her operational persona with her core identity. But she found that there was less and less of her original self to return to. The academic who had once found beauty in ancient artifacts had been subsumed by the cold, efficient operative who saw the world as a series of threats, targets, and opportunities. The grief for her husband, the fire that had initially fueled her, had cooled into a hard, dense void. She had become an instrument, perfectly honed for her purpose. But in the process, she had sacrificed the parts of herself that made her human. The victory was a strategic one, celebrated in quiet, secure rooms by the men who moved pieces on a global chessboard. But for the woman who had stood at the center of the operation, who had felt the vibration of stolen data against her hand, the only reality was the profound psychological cost of a war fought in the shadows. The operation had saved countless lives, but it had also completed the destruction of her own. She was a ghost, a weapon kept in storage, waiting for the next name, the next target, the next mission that would require her to become someone else entirely. What is the true measure of victory in a war where the battles are invisible and the soldiers lose their identities? Is an action justified if it prevents a catastrophe but requires the complete moral and psychological erosion of the individual who performs it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel.